Let's bring you this developing story now, which we have been tracking for you over the past weeks. The return of President Cyril Ramaphosa's envoys from Zimbabwe without meeting opposition political parties is raising concerns about quiet diplomacy as a way of dealing with the crisis in that country. Now, that delegation, led by former Cabinet Minister Dr. Sidney Mufamadi, former National Assembly Speaker Baleka Mbete, and former Premier Ngwako Ramatlhodi, met President Emmerson Mnangagwa, Zimbabwean president, last week. And the aim of the mission was to engage with the government of Zimbabwe and relevant stakeholders to find ways to assist that country. Let's unpack the story now. We're joined by Director of Good Governance Africa, Chris Maroleng, via our Zoom line in Pretoria this morning. Chris, hi. Thanks so much again for your time on the AM report. I think, suffice to say, there was a lot of disappointment around that special envoy spending all of one day in Zimbabwe, returning without meeting the official opposition, the MDC alliance in that country.
No, absolutely. And there was a lot of disappointment because I think there is growing frustration about the lack of movement around finding a political settlement in Zimbabwe. However, having said so, I think some of this disappointment was somewhat misplaced, particularly if you consider the fact that this is the first of what we expect to be many engagements. And within the art of diplomacy, it's always important that proper process, protocol, and indeed a staged approach to things, a staged approach to engagement is carried out by the envoys who have been appointed by President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa.
So you're saying this is just, we shouldn't feel the way we're feeling. This is the first step in hopefully a number of steps as South Africa continues to engage with that country.
I think it's too early to judge the efficacy of this engagement by the South African envoys deployed there by the South African government to try and bring the parties closer together. I think what is encouraging is that there is actually been movement by the South African government following pressure from civil society, the citizens of South Africa, for the government to be seen to be engaging following the violation of human rights in that country. However, also we need to understand that the levers available to South Africa in terms of applying some kind of pressure, some kind of dramatic push on the Zimbabwean government are very limited, considering the fact that the Zimbabwean government is quick to point out that they are a sovereign country, that they believe that they enjoy the legitimacy of being in place because of elections. So it means that the South African government is really hamstrung in terms of what it can do to influence their Zimbabwean counterparts to go towards some kind of greater engagement that includes more than the opposition MDC led by Nelson Chamisa, who, by the way, the envoys were unable to see at the insistence, we understand, of Emmerson Mnangagwa. But it's important to note that this is probably the first of many engagements that will see various parties broadly brought into some kind of negotiated engagement in that country.
Yeah, Chris, what you're saying there now is that, you just mentioned it's important for the South African government to be seen to be doing something in the alleged human rights abuses unfolding in Zimbabwe. And I suppose that is the worry, particularly from civil society organizations in that country, opposition parties in that country, the people in that country, is that is all it is, that South Africa wants to be seen to be intervening there.
Well, a cynical approach and view of South Africa's engagement in Zimbabwe would lead you to that conclusion. However, I think that we're seeing something very different. And this is really raised by the fact that the implications of the crisis in Zimbabwe, the implications of the economic decline in that country has significant ramifications for South Africa, but more importantly also for the region. So it is incumbent on the government of South Africa, led by our President Cyril Ramaphosa, not just to be seen to be engaging in bringing the parties closer towards some kind of political settlement in Zimbabwe, but in actual fact to be pushing for the settlement, which will hopefully restore some semblance of order in terms of the economy, but more importantly, allow the Zimbabweans themselves to find each other. And in fact, what we have been saying is that ultimately the solution for the crisis in Zimbabwe, given the fact that the international community, including South Africa, have been preoccupied with their own problems related to the downturn in the economy brought about by the COVID-19 epidemic, and certainly other impacts of this global pandemic, means that ultimately the focus currently is inward by many of the potential interlocutors that could have brought about change to Zimbabwe. So ultimately, this solution, this resolution to the political impasse in Zimbabwe can be found by the Zimbabweans themselves.
Chris, so we've been tracking the story on the AM report for some weeks now. We've spoken to the opposition MDC alliance. We've spoken to former ministers in the Zimbabwean government, and the stories are so completely different. The MDC alliance gives accounts of their own activists, their own spokesperson, in fact, being detained for their protests against the Zimbabwean government. The former finance minister, who we also spoke to on this show, saying that the videos that we've seen of people being beaten in the streets, of people being arrested for being activists, for being journalists, for speaking out against the government, that those videos are in fact from 2016 or from 2018, and yet the people in those videos are wearing masks. We know that that's a new development in the time of COVID-19. So I suppose the question is, if things are going to change in Zimbabwe, should there not first be an acknowledgement of what is unfolding there?
Absolutely, Michelle. And certainly the denouncement of what is patently abductions, arrests, tortures, and severe abuse and oppression of the people of Zimbabwe, and in actual fact the stripping of the civil liberties of normal citizens, cannot be denied. We have seen evidence of this in the form of pictures. You and I, Michelle, used to work with a prominent journalist called Hopewell Chinono, who was arrested and is currently languishing in Chikurubi maximum security prison for simply highlighting corruption in terms of the procurement of COVID-19 supplies. So we have seen many other activists, in fact, opposition activists also being abused, being subject to the violation of their human rights and civil liberties. So there's no doubt that the situation there has taken a terrible turn for the worst. It has seen a situation where the democratic space has been narrowed quite significantly, and room for maneuver by civil society and, in actual fact, the opposition has increasingly become less and less. So in essence, let's just get that out of the way. There is a significant decline in the human rights conditions in Zimbabwe. There is a situation also in terms of the economy where inflation is recorded to be over 700%. 60% of Zimbabweans are said to be food insecure and requiring some kind of food assistance in the next few weeks. So the situation there is no child's play. It is at crisis proportions. So we must first of all acknowledge that, definitely, and simply say to the government of Zimbabwe that ultimately they cannot hide the travesty that is going on in the country under the leadership of President Emerson Mnangagwa of ZANU-PF.
Yeah. Chris, before we let you go, you talked about COVID-19 and the fact that it's necessitated really countries looking inward, South Africa itself grappling with its own challenges related to the pandemic, related to corruption and various other challenges in our country that we are focused on here. So perhaps it does in some way make it difficult to look beyond our own borders. But the Zimbabwean government itself also in many ways using the COVID-19 pandemic to not only stop us from keeping an eye on a situation like what's unfolding with Hopewell Chinono, another bail application, yet again the media and the public barred from being at the court to see what unfolds in that courtroom, and the government says it's to stop the spread of COVID-19. We saw that happening at the end of July as well. That protest was meant to get underway on the streets of the country the end of June or July. You'll correct me, Chris. Also, again, that crackdown, the prevention of that protest happening under the guise of protecting people from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Absolutely. In actual fact, what we have seen is a dusk till dawn curfew being imposed in Zimbabwe, and ostensibly, according to the government of that country, this has been imposed in order to increase social distancing and reduce the spread of COVID-19. But really, when you look at it, a cynical approach to this would actually indicate to us that this has been really driven by security concerns that the government has to keep people at home, to keep them off the streets, make it difficult for them to protest, engage in such actions like demonstrations where they could converge and show their antipathy to the government of the day in that country. So certainly we have also seen COVID-19 being used in many instances, as you indicate, by the government really as a ruse to make sure that using security details that the people of Zimbabwe are really further disenfranchised and not allowed to express their views in a public sense. So the COVID-19 pandemic has been used in Zimbabwe and in many more autocratic countries as an excuse to further clamp down, increase surveillance on people, and strip people of their civil liberties. I think it's incumbent on the South African government, on the Southern African development community, especially the African Union, to say to the government of Zimbabwe that it is unacceptable that even during this period of COVID-19, that people's civil liberties, their rights, their dignity is being stripped away, abductions, tortures, and indeed extra-legal actions are taken against people of Zimbabwe. This must come to an end. And we must say very clearly within the region that if we believe in democracy, in the rule of law, if we believe in the rights of people as being sacrosanct, as is enshrined in the constitution of our country, we cannot sit back and allow a situation like the one that is happening in Zimbabwe to occur on our watch.
Chris Maroleng, thanks so much for your time. Chris is Director of Good Governance Africa as we continue to track the unfolding story of what's happening on the streets of Zimbabwe.